Hello chess parents! Today we are going to learn how the pawn moves. The pawn looks like this. It's the shortest piece on the chessboard, and it has this round ball on its top. Even though the pawn is the weakest piece on the chessboard, there are 8 pawns. So by sheer numbers alone, the pawn becomes a critical player in the game, and understanding pawn movement is critical to playing a good game of chess. The pawn always advances up the board. It's always moving forward. The pawn is never allowed to move backwards. It's never allowed to move sideways. All other pieces can advance and retreat as needed, but only the pawn is restricted to advancing forward in front of its army. Most moves, the pawn will advance 1 square forward like this. A very nice, simple, easily understood movement. However, the pawn, on its first move, has the special ability to move 2 squares forward if it wants to. In this position, this pawn right here is the only pawn that has not yet moved. It's still on the second row where the pawns begin the game. It can advance 2 squares forward if it wants to. It could also choose to advance 1 square forward. It's entirely at the discretion of the player. Both are possible in this position. The other key thing about the pawn is that the pawn moves differently when it advances up the board to an empty square and when it captures. These pawns cannot capture the pawns in front of them. There is a blind spot there. Similarly, if we make a move for white and give black the move, the black pawns also cannot capture. However, white is able to capture this pawn, and black is able to capture this pawn. Why does that work? When a pawn captures, it moves diagonally like a bishop 1 square. The way that I think about this is that the pawns are foot soldiers. They are armed with a sword and a shield, basic weaponry. If we imagine a shield being kept in front of the pawn right here, the shield prevents the pawn from attacking directly ahead. It protects the pawn, but it also prevents a forward attack. However, we can use our sword to attack diagonally forward to the side of the shield. Very classic kind of foot soldier fighting from back in the days of the Greeks and the Romans. So, in this position, these 4 pawns here, which are kind of facing off against each other, are in a position where the pawns cannot capture the pawn directly in front of them because the shield is in front and it prevents attack, but they can capture diagonally like this. So the pawns move forward to an empty square 1 square ahead. On their first move, they can move 2 squares forward if they want to, and when they capture, they must capture diagonally. They never move backwards, they never move sideways. Finally, there's one other rule that we'll cover with the pawn. When a pawn advances to the opposite side of the chessboard, I will show it here, as the white pawn races forward, it eventually gets all the way over here to the opposite side. It can now promote. For those of you who play checkers, this is similar to kinging a checker in the game of checkers. The pawn is not allowed to remain a pawn. It is required to promote to a more powerful piece. It cannot become a king. You can never have 2 kings for one side in a game of chess. So it can pick a queen, a knight, a rook, or a bishop as its choice of promotion. You would almost always pick the queen naturally, as it's the strongest piece. There's a common misconception that you can only pick a piece that has been captured. So if you already have the queen that you begin the game with, you cannot get a new queen. This is in fact false, and you can always choose to promote to the queen, knight, rook, or bishop as your choice suggests. So you can in fact have as many as 9 queens in a game of chess, although usually that only happens when we have a player who is showing off. Hopefully you now feel comfortable with the pawn's movement. If not, you can rewatch this video or any other videos in this series about how the pieces move. We hope to see you again soon as we cover some more complex rules like castling and en passant. Thanks. Thank you so much.